Egypt often and had a network of friends there.
For a period of time, I was able to reach all the people who I knew on their mobile phones.
He opened a Twitter account at January 25th Voices and began relaying reports nonstop.
I'm going to start the recording now. Just go ahead and begin by introducing yourself.
He put the audio of his calls online.
And they're the ones that are trying to use some sort of violence and antagonize the people.
When Egyptian authorities cut cell phone service, Scott Railton began dialing landlines, often reaching elderly Egyptians at home while younger family members were out on the streets.
I reached someone's grandmother, and there was something in her voice like an electricity. We get to the window, and then I hear her open it, and there's just this roar of chanting and voices. You know, Ya Mubarak, he's gotta go, right? And she's shouting at me like, I can't see the street. It's like a carpet of people.
From Scott Railton's sparsely furnished apartment, a storm of voices poured forth. The dispatches and audio files have now reached millions.
The idea was try to give the whole world an earful.
He's just one person among many helping to thwart an apparatus of silence. Proof that in the era of the internet and social media, people's voices will be heard. Rob Reynolds, Al Jazeera, Los Angeles.
Okay, well, we can talk some more about this battle, and I'm talking about the battle over information. Egyptian authorities have not only blocked the internet, but they also have harassed the journalists that are covering the events unfolding in Egypt. And some journalists have, in fact, been beaten by Mubarak supporters. Let's get more on that. And joining us from New York is Mohammed Abdeldayem. He's the Middle East and North Africa Program Coordinator for the Committee to Protect Journalists. Welcome to Al Jazeera. Let me get your thoughts on what we saw over the past day or so on the treatment of journalists that have been trying to do their job and cover the story from Egypt.
Yes, the Egyptian government has been attacking journalists from the very first day of this popular uprising, which is now on its 9th day. And initially, they were really mostly attacking local Egyptian journalists. And then they cut off the internet and for a period of 2.5 days suspended cell phone service. Since then, cell phones have come back and the internet has come back. And in the past day, we've seen massive amounts of physical violence against international and local journalists. And this is all in an effort to intimidate journalists, to create a media blackout. And it hasn't served its purpose. Journalists continue to work in spite of the tremendous amounts of violence exercised against them, and they continue to bring these images and these videos and this audio to a worldwide audience.
Is this a shift
not just
in
in Egypt, but
tactics?
also outside Egypt.
Sorry to cut you off, but is this a shift in tactics on the part of the Egyptian authorities then to intimidate, as you're saying?
Well, it seems to me that the Egyptian authorities are trying to do everything they can to silence the voices of the Egyptian people, which are being transmitted to the entire world via these journalists, be they local journalists or international journalists. And so we see them shifting tactics all the time, but their overall strategy is the same. It's to institute a media blackout. And they have not been able to do that, and I suspect they will not be able to do that in the future.
But now, Mohammed, we have seen that the internet has been restored. At least we've seen there are reports that it's been restored in Cairo and Alexandria. So what do you make of that? And why do you think the Egyptian government has decided to do so at this particular time?
Well, it's not entirely clear why the Egyptian government has chosen to restore the internet. You are, in fact, correct. The internet has been restored virtually throughout the country. All my contacts who were all online at one point disappeared all at once, and they re-emerged online all at once. So the internet is back. Why the government chose to do that is not entirely clear. I suspect there was a lot of pressure, international pressure on the Egyptian government to restore the internet. And ultimately, since this idea that cutting off the internet would get the people off the street didn't work, perhaps they figured they might as well reconnect the internet. But the point that I'd like to make is that journalists, when the internet was cut off and when SMS messaging was cut off and when cell phone lines were cut off, resorted to old school journalism, started faxing people. I started getting faxes from journalists. It's been years since a journalist has sent me a fax. People started relaying things by word of mouth. People started photocopying news items and passing them along. And so both the people on the ground and the journalists, as the government has tried to restrict them, have resorted to really older techniques to get their message across.
All right, Mohammed Abdeldayem, thank you very much for joining us there from New York. We'll just run through the latest developments right now that are taking place in Egypt. And in the last hour, there have been more clashes in downtown Cairo. The two sides, pro-Mubarak and pro-democracy, are pelting each other with stones and Molotov cocktails. This following a day of clashes between pro and anti-government protesters earlier on Wednesday. Some pro-Mubarak supporters attempted to break up the protests in Liberation Square. Hundreds of people were injured. Well, how did Egypt get here? Let's take a look back at what's been a tumultuous 9 days in the country. Here's my colleague Kimberly Halkett from Washington, D.C.
Thank you. Wednesday's clashes have been among the most explosive yet. The street protests began 9 days ago. Youths in Cairo organized a so-called Day of Rage on the heels of the uprising in Tunisia. When a small-scale gathering continued, hundreds of demonstrators were arrested. Nobel laureate Mohammed al-Baradei then returned to his native Egypt, taking part in the anti-government movement. Now, internet access was shut down, followed by mobile phone service soon after. And that night, the president, Hosni Mubarak, broke his silence to say he'd appoint a new cabinet. And on Saturday, he named his first vice president in 30 years, a significant day. But opposition groups rejected Mubarak's cabinet reshuffle and planned a million-strong march. Then on Tuesday, Liberation Square saw its biggest rally of the week without the sign of force. Hundreds of thousands turned out across the country. By 11 p.m., Mubarak announced he would not run for elections in September, but vowed to die on Egyptian soil. What had been largely peaceful protests then descended into chaos as Mubarak supporters faced off with pro-democracy demonstrators.
Let's speak to one of our correspondents on the ground now from Cairo for an update on the situation. Tell us where you are, what you're seeing, and what the latest is with these clashes.
Well, I'm just a couple of 100 meters away from these clashes that are ongoing between pro-government and anti-government supporters. We're seeing a building, a residential building that the pro-Mubarak supporters, they set a tree on fire with one of the Molotov cocktails. And there's like a courtyard to the entrance of that building, which is now on fire. And this, of course, is a residential building. And I have to say, I think at this point in time, we have to remember what the president said last night in his speech. He said, I'm a man of the army, and it's not in my nature to give up responsibility. But the question needs to be asked at this point in time, why are there no fire engines on the streets? Why are they allowing residential buildings to be threatened, being set on fire? There really is absolutely no order here. The streets are burning. Buildings are starting to burn. There's black smoke billowing from the bottom of this building. There had been some lights on in that building a couple of about 20 minutes ago. They've now been switched off. I would only imagine that the residents have perhaps left the building for fear that the whole thing would catch on fire. There really is no sign that this at the moment is calming down. We can hear protesters banging those steel barricades that they've set up. Molotov cocktails still being exchanged between the two sides, and it's showing absolutely no signs of dying down at the moment.
We're looking at the latest pictures that we have from the streets of Cairo as you're talking to us, and it just looks like, and it sounds like from what you're saying, it's an absolute war zone.
Yes, I suppose you could absolutely describe it as that. And, you know, the thing to ask is the military is simply standing by and doing absolutely nothing. Now, they have made a clear point throughout this week to stay neutral. They've told protesters they have a legitimate right to protest. They are, of course, also holding true to their allegiance to the president. However, at this stage, things are really descending into chaos, and what the military has done is simply pulled back and allowed it to happen. So you really need to be asking, especially when residential buildings are being threatened with fire, why there are no fire engines there. As I mentioned, this is really a scene that people need to be asking, why is this being allowed to happen?
Are people not asking that amongst themselves to one another?